Welcome to session 14, Grants, Foundations, and Gifts. In this particular segment, we're going to be dealing with the information required to help you prepare grants and the kind of tools that are really becoming essential for any kind of grant preparation. In today's presentations and discussions, we're going to be first listening to Matt Grossman, who was a former student and now works for National Hillel here in Washington, D.C. And Matt's going to be talking about the steps that are really essential in grant development. Dr. Ann Caputo, that I'll introduce a little later, is the head of the academic and library programs for Knight Ridder Corporation. And the tool that we're going to be using with Ann is Dialogue, looking at sources of funding for some very important projects. Two of the former students, Kathryn Hayes and Bob Wood, actually did case studies based on some of the research and looking for resources. So we're going to be watching their case studies and talking to them about the kinds of things they went through. And although the case studies were done a couple of years ago, they are just as important as valid today because of the search process that they went through. One of the emerging tools that we find very, very helpful when we're finding more and more grants is Microsoft Project. And I've asked Kathryn Valdez, who is a consultant here in the Washington, D.C. area, to talk to us a little bit about this Microsoft Project use. And I've asked her to demonstrate with a little chart that she has and to talk about the kinds of steps that she's gone through and as she used Microsoft Project and how valuable she sees this in the grant development process. Now, Kathryn's not going to look at the Microsoft Project from a project that's put together, but more importantly, how do you get ready to put a project together? So that's going to be important to us. The other thing that we consider very important is one of the most significant tools we see coming down the line is a tool dealing with voice recognition. And a company that we dealt with a couple years ago, Dragon Corporation, has developed a really excellent voice recognition project, which is constantly in a state of development. And we're going to be watching one of their former representatives, Bill Folks, talk about what voice recognition is all about and actually show you a demonstration of how it works in actual practice, looking at one face of a grant. So they're the kinds of things that you're going to see. Information is becoming critical to the process of finding resources and putting projects and grants together. And the tools are becoming absolutely essential as well. So we're going to look at both the tools and information as we go through this process. Let me introduce Dr. Ann Caputo from Knight Ridder Corporation. Ann is here today as head of the academic and library programs for the corporation. And we're going to be demonstrating a dialogue today and how important dialogue is as an essential tool in providing information that's easy to get to and can be organized, particularly in the grant development and acquisition process. And what I'd like you to talk about today is a little bit about Knight Ridder and the concept you have in your database organization that would really be helpful for people who are in the grants process. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, Reynolds, thank you for asking me to participate in your program. Knight Ridder is, as you know, an information company that has historically been interested in focusing their product offerings on newspapers. About 8 years ago, they purchased a company called Dialogue Information Services, which had started as a research project out of the Lockheed Missiles and Space Organization in California. Dialogue Information Services has, within the last 2 years, become Knight Ridder Information, with Dialogue as its product. The idea behind all of this is that we collect a large number of databases which focus on a wide variety of subject areas, including things like science, technology, education, social sciences, of course newspapers from our parent company and from other places, as well as information from grant and grant-giving organizations. We are the largest collector of information in the world. We have over 650 separate databases, including databases that cover the entire contents of the Library of Congress, for example. We are, for many researchers, particularly those interested in grants and foundations, the researcher's dream. We are a collection of information beyond parallel. I think of us in many ways as an aggregator of information and also a siever and selector of information. We look at literally hundreds of thousands of information sources and select those that we think are the most important, the most knowledgeable, the most comprehensive, and the most useful to researchers. Thus, we present them with an already selected collection of data that they may use to prepare for grants, grant proposals, and other information offerings.
One of the things that has really been important to me as a grant developer is to have all the information I needed at my fingertips. I get a lot of arguments from people who don't use Dialogue, and their argument is, well, it's all out there. Well, maybe it is, Ann, but the question is, what does it cost to go out there and to get the information when you try to pull it all together? And one of the things about Dialogue that I've found very helpful over the years is it's in one location. And when you're trying to write a grant and you're looking for information from 15 or 20 different sources, you can't run all over the place and try to get that information. So I've found it, at least for me, to be very helpful being able to pull that information out as quickly as possible and to be able to use it to develop the whole front end portion of my grant.
Exactly. I think there are 2 points to be made here. One, the role Dialogue plays in this process is twofold. That is, it collects the information. As I said earlier, we look at literally hundreds of thousands of sources before we select the sources that we think are the most important. The second thing we do is provide you with something that is called a search engine, a machine that allows you to search through this material powerfully, in an important way that it also allows you to refine and select only the pieces of information that you want. The Internet is a powerful and useful resource as well, and we don't see that we compete directly with the Internet, but in fact augment and supplement the resources that you find in other ways. We provide you with a way to use your time cost effectively. If your time is of value, and I believe it is, whether you are a student or a professional researcher in some other capacity, we provide you with a time-saving tool, the collection and the tool to search it.
One of the things about the grant development process is we get requests for proposals, and you never get enough time to do the research necessary to address the RFPs. And if you have to go running all over the place for it, you never ever prepare the kind of front end you want to make that proposal really effective. The other thing is, you're never ever sure when you put these proposals together that you really have looked comprehensively at the full databases that are out there. How does Dialogue deal with those issues?
We have looked comprehensively for you. We have selected the resources that we think are the most important, and not just in our opinion, but in the opinion of those in the industry who make it a business to learn about these things. So we have pre-selected the most valuable resources and are there for you to use with our search and refinement engines. So we take what might have been a multiple day or even many week process of looking in other ways, including the Internet, for resources, and turn this into an hour or less process.
Does Dialogue have such a wide range of information bases that you basically can address any of the issues for the knowledge base that comprises our society?
Yes, I think that's an excellent point. There are many different commercial and Internet-based online services. Some of them specialize in particular subject areas, medical, for example, or legal. Dialogue is often known as the supermarket information service because it has collected data in almost every field of human endeavor. including business, science, engineering and technology, as well as arts and humanities, social sciences, and a whole collection, the world's most unique in fact, on foundations and grant-giving organizations.
Today when we do a search, we're going into something called, is it a single search?
Yes, it's called One Search, which means with one search you search across multiple databases.
And we're going to be looking at a database called FoundAt, which is the Foundation database. I'm assuming that's the short name for it.
Yes, that's our nickname for it, if you like.
That's your nickname. You brought with you the just some of the databases. Now, this is not meant for the audience to read these, and nor for us to read them too, but it looks like there's 300 or 400 databases on here, aren't
Yes, there are now, in fact, over 600, coming
si-
in on 650. So this is a list that a searcher might have posted on the wall above their computer or other resource that they're using to remind them of the collections that we have. And we have aggregated or collected together certain clusters of data focused on different subjects. So when you mentioned we would be doing a one search on a foundation collection, we have already sifted through the 650 resources we have and selected the ones that are most appropriate for that.
Is it possible when you do a search to connect several different databases at one time, so that rather than go back into the database and then come out of it to get what you want and go back in, that it's possible that if, for example, you could look at 20 different newspapers at the same time, you could make sure that you had comprehensively looked at what might be provided in those 20 newspapers?
Yes, in fact, you could look at up to 60 newspapers at one time, including national newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Christian Science Monitor, and so on, as well as individual newspapers or newspapers by geographic cluster. We often have foundation researchers looking for people prominent in their local communities. So if you were in Denver, Colorado, for example, you could say, give me all of the Colorado, Utah, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming newspapers. I'm interested in only local collections. Or you could search the entire collection at once. In fact, newspaper searching is one of the most profitable ways of looking for information about prospective donors, people who are prominent in the news. So that's one pathway that we might suggest you would take.
It's a good pathway.
And another pathway might be to look through past grants. There is a database called the Grants Database and also Foundation Grants Index that look at grants that have been given in the past. So if you know a particular foundation is interested, for example, in funding environmental research and science education in a particular place, you could search for past grant activities by those foundations and assume that they're probably still interested in searching for that kind of information and providing grants for new organizations like you.
It sounds like a very economical way to find a lot of information quickly and to be able to organize that so you could make a decision on it. One of the questions that I want to continue in, and we will when we actually do a search in a few minutes, is to look at the cost of doing a search on Dialog. Because a lot of people say that when you get into a large-scale database that you spend an awful lot of money doing a search. As you know, we did a search earlier in this show in which we were looking for the best buys on a computer system. And quite frankly, we found the best buys quickly and efficiently, and I think the whole search was like $39. And so we really were able to do it economically because it probably saved us hundreds of dollars in terms of purchasing the correct computer.
Right.
So it was really a good strategy. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to go to a bumper for just a second, and when we come back, we're going to do a search on a couple areas that are important to education.
Great.
Later on in the show, we're going to have a case study done by Bob Wood, who is one of our former students. His proposal that he wrote for funding had to do with the environment. What we're going to have Dr. Caputo do is to go into dialogue and look at the issue of computers and the environment, and she's going to do a search dealing with that whole issue, and I'm going to ask her to refine it as we go into it. So first of all, Ann, could we go in and do a search on computers and environmental research to see what's going on in the field? And then I'm going to ask you to further see if we can really narrow it down as you go into it, and let's by chance take a look and see what's going on, if there's anything at all in South Africa. So can we go through the process, and could you please talk us through the process as you go through it?
Yes, we can do that. This is the beginning of a search, and in dialogue, the terminology says we are in something called one search. One search simply means we are searching in one search strategy several different databases. In this case, databases that deal directly with the foundation directories and 2 foundation grants databases. So I have said, give me all the databases that relate to foundations. And now my search strategy is going to look like this. I'm going to type select, which means search or look for, and the word computer. And at the end of the word computer, I'm going to insert a question mark. This means any word ending, computer, computerization, computers, for example, could all be selected. This is a form of searching called truncation. Then I am going to insert a connector called AND. AND means search for this word and the word or phrase that follows. In this case, environmental and then research. I need to say that I want environmental to be next to or with the word research. So now I've entered my entire phrase. Select computer, question mark, and environmental with research. I now have 7 hints, 7 different citations or records from this database that have these words present. If I want, I can refine my search even further by specifying a particular location, or I can make it broader by going back and entering another form of my search. Let's take a look at one of these, see what we found. Freeport McRowan Incorporated Corporate Giving Program in New Orleans tells us that they have given, for example, a total of $10 million. The highest grant was $8 million. The highest grant was $100,000, lowest was $1,000. And this is an example of many kinds of references in this database, because it shows you a local grant-giving organization and not necessarily only the largest ones like the Ford Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation. So this is an example of a specific search on a particular topic, sieving through hundreds of thousands of grants, looking for specific ones dealing with, in this case, the computer and environmental research. Now, we could take a second search strategy. I know that you're interested in students who are working with computers but are also disadvantaged, and particularly in science education. So I'm going to start over again and indicate that I would like to search all of the databases in the foundation section, and I'm going to ask for it to select computer, again, with the question mark at the end, just as before, and disadvantaged. I think I'll truncate that or put a question mark at the end of that also, and oops, science. It's looking through, again, hundreds of thousands of grants that have been given on grant-giving organizations, and has told me that there are 112 possibly useful records of information about grant-giving organizations that provide information on computers and disadvantaged and science.
Could we look through a couple of those?
We can.
And could we use a format that would give us more information than just the basic grant-giving piece?
We can do that, absolutely. Let's look at this in the longest possible format, which we call format 5, and then we'll page up so we can look toward the top of this.
Quite a bit of information, isn't it, on each grant?
Exactly. Let's move up toward the top here and begin to look at this from the top down. Lots of text here, and you'll notice in the text that some of the words are bold or highlighted. That means these are the words that we have used to find this.
That's really sort of amazing when you consider that it has literally gone through 100,000 records in
Many
order to come
hundred.
up with this, and it has already assigned the bold type so you know exactly where to look at in the whole grant description in order to come up with your particular area of interest.
Exactly. This particular record is from the AT&T Foundation. We start at the top with a description, the address of the organization, the telephone number, its parent company, when it was started in 1984 in this case, type of foundation. In this case, it's a company-sponsored foundation. Status active means that it is still actively giving grants, and be important for you to know that. General purpose and activities comes next, and then a long section on financial data, assets amount. In this case, this is $128 million in assets. Listing of expenditures, total amount given, highest and lowest grant, average grant amount.
Going back for just a second, I also noticed that they also receive money, so they must get money somehow beside the money that they provide as part of AT&T, right?
Yes, that's correct. They receive money from a variety of sources, as well as give money in grants to the appropriate organizations.
Let's see what they do for let's go down to the bold area and see if it makes any sense for what we're looking for.
Moving down through the text, this is a long description of
Sure
the kinds
is.
of things that they are typically interested in giving grants for. In this case, it talks about improved teacher preparation, science and engineering support through 4 programs, special purpose grants in science and engineering, computer science, material science, and other selected science areas. So it sounds like this is of interest to you.
It also says there's a program for historically black colleges and universities with engineering science education programs.
Exactly. Exactly the kind of combination of ideas that you wanted in your search.
Exactly, yeah. And this would really help in order to tell us what was available as where we write a grant in this area. I also like the idea of the way this is laid out because it says geographic limitation.
Precisely.
It says giving on a national basis, including, and then it mentions again a number of states, which includes Washington, D.C. So what I'm thinking, these are probably target states?
Yes, these are states where grants have already been given.
Great.
And then toward the end, we begin to see a section on governing body, executive staff, listing of trustees, number of staff 24, application limits, and then some key descriptive information.
Well, it tells you how to apply, when to apply, and the other part I like about this is it lists all the descriptors that are related to this. So if we want to go back into the database and we're looking for something more specific, we know that those descriptors are important, and we can plug those descriptors back in order to do a secondary search. Isn't that correct?
This is exactly right. We know now that they use the term economically disadvantaged, for example. They also use computer science, engineering science, library science, and other specific subsets of the field that you're interested in.
So if we were going to do a search like that, we could say computer science or engineering science or whatever the actual descriptors that we want, and we knew that they would hit.
This is exactly correct. This is a process of searching that professional searchers call pearl growing, which means you start with the nebulous, tiny core concept, a piece of sand and the oyster, if you will, and then use the information you get from your search to build a larger and larger body of knowledge, the pearl growing out of the oyster in this example.
What I like about this is that, you can also print this out, correct?
Yes, I could send this to a disk to be stored and downloaded to a word processing package, or I could simply send it to a printer and have it printed, or I could store it permanently on my hard disk.
If I were working with a group of or other researchers at the same time, could I store this information or send that out over fax or over email?
Yes, you can send it out over any standard email system. You can send it out to a fax address. You can send it by other kinds of electronic information delivery means, put it onto networks, distribute it throughout your organization, virtually anything that you like. Realize that by paying the fees to use these services, you are also paying copyright fees. We have a program called ERA, Electronic Redistribution of Information, which allows you to distribute by paying copyright rights throughout your organization and retain it permanently. So you don't have to worry about whether you are copying something incorrectly or illegally.
A couple other points here that are important is they tend to list the names of all the staff
Yes.
here. And also members of the board. I don't know if that's a legal requirement or whether or not it's to help people who are applying for these things.
The information comes from grant status applications that these foundations must make, and in that application they must list all of their staff and their members of boards and of trustees. This is helpful for the researcher because it would allow them to address letters personally to a particular individual whose name they know, or it will allow them to search across a variety of foundations to see how many boards a particular individual that they're interested in might sit on. So if you know of someone who's prominent in your community and want to know in advance the kinds of things they're interested in, you can search this to find out how many different boards they might sit on, and that way track their interest.
Could we take the same search strategy and could we, for example, let's assume we were interested in the same area for South Africa.
Yes, exactly.
Could we just, without having to go through the whole process again, could we simply add it on to our search strategy?
Yes, we can go back and look at that original search, the one on computers. And add a phrase like South Africa, which is where we're specifically interested in focusing our attentions.
Oh,
And
so there's a hit.
incredibly, there is a hit.
Right.
There's one on that precise topic, so let's take a look at it.
Well, the reason I mention this, there's so much going on in South Africa now in terms of the environment,
Right.
because manufacturing over the years has produced some problems and environmental research to be important. Let's take a look a little bit about what this particular grant, it's an IBM grant.
It's an IBM International Foundation grant from their headquarters in Armonk. IBM, of course, established this in 1985. They are the principal donor. It is a company-sponsored foundation, and they are presently active. Let's move down a little bit and look at their asset amount and then something about the description. It's a large foundation, over $5 million, almost $5.5 million in assets. And they have received over $20 million and expended over $18 million. So you can see that this is a very active foundation.
And last year they gave about 26 grants.
Exactly.
Okay.
Relatively large grants, $250,000, for example. Environmental research program from their using their computer-based technology. Let's move down a little farther and see if we can determine how and why they're interested in South Africa. Higher education, secondary and elementary education, hospitals in general, available for proposals that fall within their fields of interest and in a variety of settings.
Is it possible to use these descriptors in other areas of dialogue?
Yes, these are words that you may use anywhere, although realize that the descriptors and descriptions are unique to each database, but they can give you specific indicators of things that you should use elsewhere. Here at the top of the screen, we notice approximately 30,000 black South African elementary students have been introduced to English through this program. So here's why this was retrieved. It has already given grants to South African educational institutions.
And this tells us exactly what has taken place and how much money that has been assigned to this, or how much in resources have been assigned to this particular project.
This is exactly correct. Now I'd like to emphasize that the interface that we are using, this Windows-based version of Searching Dialogue, is Dialogue's native mode. This is designed for people who have been trained to use this and use this routinely as a source of information. There are a wide variety of other interfaces for casual or infrequent users or those who don't wish to be trained intensively to use these tools. These are icon-based graphical interfaces, and the model for charging for these is different than the native mode of dialogue as well. These models allow you to search and browse as much as you want, and you pay for the output of the search only. Like going into a bookstore, looking through the books and deciding which one you want, and then purchasing the specific ones that you would like to have.
When you begin to do a search of this kind, and you're looking for the broadest possible array, the most comprehensive array of information to make sure that you really haven't missed anything, what kind of strategy do you use? Do you start off with the largest descriptor first and then move down? Or do you try to enter everything in all at one time?
There's a search strategy that information scientists use called successive fractions, and that is starting with the broadest kind of search strategy and then breaking off pieces that are not wanted until you get down to the essential heart of your search. This kind of search strategy works well when you're beginning the search process because you often don't know how large a result is going to be. So yes, expert searchers very often start off with a broad general focus on their search and then move down to the more specific and narrower facets of that search as they go along. Interactively, this is a very possible scenario because these systems allow you to ask questions and then based on the answers that you get, move on to the next question.
So for example, when we did the environment search, or suppose the one question we wanted, the one descriptor we wanted to do was environment. What kind of a hit would we use if we just did,
well, let's try and see. I'm going to make it even broader by placing a question mark at the end of the word environment. We get almost 20,000 references, over 19,700 references to this particular word. Obviously, this is way too many.
Obviously.
A searcher might start this way just to determine that there's a significant pool of information about the environment in this database. And then they might, in successive ways, break this down into particular and specific steps. For example, we could say search for step 2, which was the environment, and computers. We'll intersect those two, and notice that we've dropped down to below 240 references to these two words in the same record somewhere.
It's really surprising that it can go through all those references in such a short period of time, narrow it down to a point where you can look at very specific subdivisions of your overall concept.
And consider that the mainframe computers running this are in California, about 3,000 miles away from us here in Washington, D.C. And this resource is being used by dozens, maybe even at this time of day, hundreds of other researchers. So indeed, it is a powerful and comprehensive service.
Well, I've used this for years, and I've never noticed a slowdown in the search processes. Is that normal?
That's correct. It's our responsibility to our customers to provide as rapid a response time as possible. So we have lots of redundancy built into the system.
One more issue, Ann, and that is what we call relative cost.
Yes.
A lot of times, some of the people I work with complain about the cost of the system. And I've always made the argument that if they had to go out and get this information themselves from all the data sources that there are, it would take days, weeks, or sometimes months.
Or such a long time that you would not consider doing this. I think you've gone to the heart of the issue here. We've often been challenged to go into companies and talk about how using this can be a time saver, and we've sometimes had challenges where we ask researchers to use these same questions and do them manually or using internet resources, while we are standing with our laptop doing them using dialogue. And we almost always determine that it's far more cost effective to have a researcher use this tool than to have them use other tools that are not as rapid and powerful.
One of the things that I do at this university is I show students how to use dialogue. I don't know if that makes me an instructor or not.
It does.
It does?
We're very happy to have you do that.
I'm a dialogue instructor then. One of the questions that the students often ask is, well, how can I learn this on my own? And what's the answer to that?
I think the answer in short is that the tools we are preparing for them to use are now so easy to use that instruction is really not needed. The native mode is going away. We're going to see tools that allow them to do this on their own.
So that means I'm going to lose my job?
I don't think so. We'll find plenty of other things for you to do in the future.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the bumper now before we go on. I mentioned in my introduction that Mr. Matt Grossman, one of my former students and now my colleague, has been actively involved in using a number of tools to really facilitate the grant development process. But there are also a number of steps that you really need to go through. And so what I've asked Matt to do today is to really talk about what kinds of steps are involved in this whole grant development process. Matt, this was recorded a couple of years ago, but we feel it's just as valid today as it was then. I also mentioned that in there that Matt now works for National Hillel. That are really important to us. At this time, we'd like to talk with Matt Grossman. And Matt Grossman is here from the Council of Jewish Federations here in town, but it's a national organization. Matt, why don't you just take a minute or so and tell us the kinds of things you do at the Council before we get into the project that you worked on this year.
I work with the network of Jewish federations across this country, which provides social services to agencies. And what I do is assist them in accessing federal resources to implement the programs that they use to serve populations in need.
Is this kind of activity really important to the Federation?
Certainly it is. Traditional forms of resource development have changed over the past few years and commonly fluctuate as the economy fluctuates. Looking for alternative resources in the terms of foundation gifts, federal government grants, corporation gifts is something that is becoming more and more popular in the whole scope of total financial resource development. So I feel that the government resources are a very substantial place where social service agencies need to tap into potential funding.
Well, you certainly have done that by working with George Washington University this year, Matt, and putting together a Corporation for National and Community Service grant. And I think it's really important that all of us realize exactly what took place and how important this grant was and is to George Washington University and to this whole community in the Washington, D.C. area. It's my understanding that the grant that you wrote and put together has been submitted by George Washington University to the corporation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And when was that submitted, Matt?
Submitted yesterday afternoon.
Great. Well, why don't you talk through some of the major processes that you went through for this grant, but quite frankly, Matt, you would go through for any kind of grant.
This grant was especially interesting because it came from a new federal program under the Corporation for National and Community Service. This was an initiative by President Clinton to create sort of a domestic Peace Corps to involve students and other American citizens in lasting service opportunities to bring some positive change to this country. And the reason I bring this up is because it was a new program. It used a lot of new concepts in federal grantsmanship, and a lot of those concepts involved using computer technology. There are three areas where I really use computer technology in developing federal resources. Those areas are in accessing information, organizing information, and presenting information. And in accessing information, I sort of split it into two categories. You can access information that could bring potential resources to your program, but also once you've identified what those resources are, there's certain information that you need to access to maximize your ability to get those resources. As you know, the Foundation Center offers a tremendous amount of opportunities to access data through online systems, but the federal government does as well. And one way that they do this is through the Catalog on Federal and Domestic Assistance, which we'll hear about later. And that is sort of a database that contains over 1,300 different federal funding opportunities. Now, the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance is available in a hard copy in a large book and is about 1,500 pages, but it's also available now through the federal government on disk in a DOS text format.
Well, that's great. In fact, there's Jerry Varner, who's going to be with us, who will probably go into some detail on that.
Right. Because it's available in this format, it makes it very easy to create search strategies to access information quickly. But one thing with federal funds that's sort of different from accessing other resources from foundations or corporations is that laws are constantly changing and program requirements are constantly changing. So it does require more of an online type system where you can access information as it changes. The Catalog for Federal Domestic Assistance is issued, I believe, quarterly, but because of the federal government system, regulations can change daily. And a lot of government agencies now are moving to online systems. I know the Department of Education has an online system. FAPERS, which we'll also hear about later, that puts you in touch with the catalog and other federal regulation information, also is accessible online. So really, the catalog is not the only tool you need to access potential resources.
Well, one of the things that we're going to talk about also is using dialogue. We've been very fortunate in this program in having dialogue as a database, and they have actually two parts of it. One is that they have the grants, gifts, and foundations from the private sector, and they also have an incredible amount of background information. So all those things are important in the kinds of job that you did. When you developed this grant, what was the actual process you used to access the information to finally come up with the grant? How did you do that?
Once I recognized the program that we were to pursue, I began to use computer technology to gather background materials on that program. This involved looking to clearinghouses, which could be dialed in online, using computer system to access libraries on latest articles. Because this is a new program, much of the information about the themes and goals of the program were only available in very recent newspaper articles. One way that this program has really, the whole corporation has really used computer technology is through the internet system. They have made all their applications and regulations available through internet, where if you send them a blank message, they will immediately return regulations and forms to you on a particular program.
Is that completely automated?
Completely automated. It's a fastback system. Within 5 minutes of sending your message, it's put through the internet and you receive back regulations. So almost immediately you can dive into the program.
Well, that's pretty interesting. What else did you do to access the information? Did you talk to a lot of people about this?
Certainly. In accessing the information, it's important that experts are identified who are presenting the proper information. There's a ton of commentary about all programs out there, and it's hard to know which commentary can really help you. By being able to look at the most recent articles in various publications about the Corporation on National Service, we were able to identify experts in the field who could really help us with the proposal.
And once you got that information, how did you then organize your proposal and your second step to put it all online? And this sort of revolves around different software programs that I use to develop proposals rather. One program
that I used fairly extensively was Microsoft Project. And I know that this was demoed in previous classes, or previous class, where we were able to create a work breakdown structure of exactly what needed to be accomplished to complete the grant on time and accurately. One of the two greatest challenges in federal grantsmanship is making sure, number one, that all the requirements that are laid out by law are met. And that's something that can be very difficult to do because you're drawing them from many sources. You're drawing them from federal regulations. You're drawing them from applications. You're drawing them from priority areas. You're drawing them potentially from conversations that you have with programming officers. So to be able to put that information in one organized format is a challenge. But if you're able to do that, you ensure that the information that you're presenting is the information that the program readers are looking for. So using Microsoft Project was one way to pull this strategy together. And a second thing that must be done is obviously getting the project done on time. There are no extensions through the federal government. And it's a shame to see a lot of hard work go for naught just because time limits can't be met. And by using software, you can really map out what needs to be done and when it needs to be done.
You can also give a copy of that software to the people who are in the project itself. And you can also change it as you go through the project constantly, because there is no such thing as a completely stable project.
Absolutely, and there's actually another way to use it where we were asked to submit a timeline of how we would implement our plan if we received funding. Mm-hmm. So I was able to use Microsoft Project to print out a work breakdown structure and an implementation plan for our particular program. And that actually went into the grant. So that was very helpful.
It also looks pretty nice too, doesn't it? When it's done?
Does. It does.
Did you use the budget portion of that for as well, or did you just do the budget separately?
Doing the budget and combining a budget with a narrative has been a tough thing in the past. But now, with recent advances in the way spreadsheets and word processors integrate data with each other, it's become a much easier task. I tend to do budgets through Microsoft Excel, which is a spreadsheet program. And now with the latest introduction of OLE2, Object Linking and Embedding 2, a spreadsheet can very easily be put into Microsoft Word, which is a word processing program, and be manipulated from within Word, but using the tools from Excel.
It's not just embedded, it's also an active file. So you can actually manipulate the numbers and never leave Word. And
Exactly.
That's how you're doing it.
Exactly. This was a very important piece of technology to come out, and I understand now that the whole Microsoft Office system has this OLE technology, so a database, PowerPoint, can also be linked in with that same kind of manipulation tools.
Makes it very nice, particularly in the grant proposal business, where you'd like to have all the features. You would like to have your text, and you want to have visual, you want to have graphics, images, you want to have your spreadsheet.
Certainly.
And you can put them all in directly from within Word. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Well, that makes it pretty nice. And you use several of these tools within using the same concept when you organized it.
Absolutely. One thing that Word, I mentioned before, that it's very important to get all the information that you need, that needs to go into the proposal, sort of into what I call a grants analysis, where I break the proposal up into its smallest pieces, and under those smallest pieces I put exactly what needs, not necessarily the information itself, but what information or what question must be answered in that particular section of the proposal. So Microsoft Word allowed me to create a template sort of on top of the actual proposal itself, where I can, for example, a section on evaluation, I can, before I begin writing what the proposal needs to include in the evaluation, or writing the evaluation itself, I can put the exact concepts that are listed in the priority areas of the application actually on my file right there. So it sort of guides me through the process of writing the proposal.
Sounds pretty good. Presentation Matt, is very, very important, isn't it?
Sure.
How it looks, and in some cases it's easy because if the federal government has given you the exact format, that makes it a little easier. But even within that format, if you could make a very clean presentation with graphic images and ideas laid out in such a way that they're bold, that they are italics when needed, but they emphasize certain points that you really want to emphasize. This contributes significantly to allowing the user of a project, the person who reads it, the person who has to work with it, to understand it, and it certainly improves your capacity to get a project funded.
Without question.
What are the kinds of things you thought about as you put this together to make sure that it was presented this way?
One thing that I considered was whether or not to use a word processor to publish the document, or whether to use desktop publishing software to do it.
Well, that's interesting. What decision did you make?
I ended up using a word processor, and in the future, I think it really depends on the proposal, but it's kind of a combination between the two. You need some tools from one and some to the other, from the other. And the way to determine this is the tools needed in word processing, I found, were tools that were some of the analytical tools, the spell checking, the grammar checking, the thesaurus, you know, whatever little programs are built in. The headers and footers. I found this to be very important. You're not going to win $1 million grant with spelling errors, there's no question. And technology has given us no excuse but to present perfect proposals. The desktop publishing option, though, is very important when you have space considerations. A lot of times there are strict limitations on how many pages each section of a grant can be.
Right.
And desktop publishing gives you a few more options on how to get all of your data onto a particular space. In this case, I didn't necessarily need that, so I stuck with the word processor.
But you also counted your words, I'll bet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because if you don't count your words and you go over, and there's a word limitation, then you are in trouble.
I think it was you that once told me that 60% of all federal proposals are tossed out immediately because of errors in following the directions. And certainly in errors of length and word counts, this would be true.
There's one thing you haven't talked about in this presentation, and that's the grammar and punctuation aspect. And you and I both know that if you can't read what's there, no matter how well it's written, if it's not clear and deliberate, then the readers are not going to evaluate you very well. Right. How did you take care of this?
Certainly, I used a grammar checker, a grammar check program on the text. And what this tells you are basic reading levels, difficulty scores for what you've written. And I think it's true that most people reading proposals read at an 8th grade reading, as do most people in America read at an 8th grade reading level.
Right.
And anything over that, you're really, depending on what kind of proposal it is, you're challenging their ability to understand. And I mean this in a positive way. A technical proposal to the National Institute of Health will obviously have a higher reading level, higher syllables per word.
And different vocabulary.
And
too.
different vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep in mind that the people who are reading your proposal come from certain backgrounds. A person reading a national service proposal is going to be a social worker, potentially, a teacher, a nonprofit administrator, and you have to look almost at the publications that they're used to reading, and you can almost take, and you taught me this trick once, take a publication, a common publication that a reader would read, put it through a scanner, put it through a grammar checker, and come out with the average reading level for that presentation.
I'm not sure we should tell them that, though.
Good point.
Matt, it comes down to this. You've used an incredible amount of technology to put a grant together, a grant proposal together. Word processors, graphics, spreadsheets. I'll ask you one last question. Is it possible to really write a grant these days without using all this technology and really do an effective and efficient job?
The days of typewriters for grants are over, even in the ways of filling out forms. I have had a grant, I've been working on a grant recently that required me to fill out 100 pages of forms. By using computer technology, this probably cut at least 50 hours out of the process for me. There are certain form software that's available where you can scan in government forms and fill them out right on your screen and edit them and improve their performance. And that's just one tiny area where computer technology helps you.
I think if you put it all together, technology and grant development is here to stay. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Professor Franti will carry on with what he's doing today in the second hour, but I just interrupted in order to remind you of the last assignment that's due today. I hope everyone will turn it in on time. As I said, we don't have enough grace period. The assignment is listed today. You have 10 days to turn it in, and this means that by the 5th of May, all assignments have to reach the section leaders. Samples of those assignments will be sent to me, and I will regrade them and curve all 4 sections accordingly, so that we will try to standardize the grades as much as we can between all 4 sections. Some section leaders are very lenient, others are tough, and others are fair. So we want to make it all fair, hopefully. Next week we will have a couple of new guests, distinguished professors here at the George Washington University, Dr. John Boswell, professor at the Graduate School of Education, and we will also have Dr. Edward Vest, known educator not only at GW but throughout the metropolitan area, a man who has over 30 years of experience in the public school and private school systems throughout Virginia, Maryland, and Washington. And we will enjoy talking to both of them regarding matters that will interest all leaders and hopefully will benefit all leaders, not for this course, but hopefully for a lifetime. We are after getting information and tools that you leaders can be able to use them throughout your life and throughout your careers, hopefully. Any demos that we're using are pertaining to a very short period of time. So see you next time.
Early in the show, we asked the students if they would be developing a project that we might be able to submit for funding to a private or to a public agency. And a number of people volunteered, and out of that group of volunteers, we picked 2 people that we thought really had projects of national significance. And the first of those projects that we'd like to talk about today is one developed by Kathryn Hayes. Now, you all know Kat Hayes. Kat Hayes is the person that when you get on AOL and you're looking to have instructions, or you want to do something about the show, or you want some information, she's always there for you. But there's another part of what she does, and that is she has an excellent idea that she'd like to share with you, and we'd like to take you through the process that we've begun to go through for her and with her, hopefully to find some funds and to really make a difference in the area of adjudicated youth. Kathryn, welcome to the show today.
Hi.
We understand that there are 3 areas that you'd like to talk about with us, and one is the creation of this whole idea for the adjudicated youth. The second is searching for resources, and we sort of did a little bit of that together. And the third are the next steps. So why don't you start off and tell us, where did this idea come from?
Well, actually, I'll tell you a little bit about my idea. I'm working with a group called After School Kids, or ASK, and their mission is to provide the support that's necessary to help adjudicated youth complete their probation without rearrest. And a colleague of mine had begun working with this group a while back, and he actually did a prototype of the project that I'm proposing, which is to incorporate interactive multimedia and telecommunications technology into the activities that the site coordinators do with the kids. The site coordinators try to work with the kids to develop their self-esteem and to improve some of their scholastic skills, to work on their math or their reading. And so I wanted for them to have access to other tools to use within their workshops. They meet with the kids twice a week for the period of their probation. So that's the basic aspect of my idea. The colleague of mine that developed the basic concept has already done a prototype. He did not put the technology in hands of the students. He developed the interactive multimedia himself. He took writing and photographs that the kids had developed. They did interviews in their neighborhood. It was an organized project, but basically he put together the interactive multimedia to just see if it would work and to see how the kids would respond to it, and his results were pretty positive. I actually, though, would like the kids to do all of that themselves. I would like them to do all the work on the computer, to do all the scanning and all the development. And then our idea is to do an exchange. He now is in California, and so I would like to exchange the work they've done through telecommunications to a group in California. So they'll have an audience for the work that they're doing on the computer.
That's a good idea. This has national significance in a sense because it's the kind of thing you could do in any location, to any other location if you wanted to. It's a good idea. Well, Kathryn, one of the things that you and I did when you told me about the idea is we did some searches. We searched a database here at the university that had some grants, and we also did a search in Dialogue in their grants, gifts, and foundations area. And we came up with a number of sources of funding. Out of that, you picked, I guess, one or more areas that we began to look at. Can you tell us what you thought about and as we went through this process?
Right. I actually felt that this project could potentially be funded because everyone right now is talking about the national information infrastructure, and I think incorporating telecommunications is a way for people to pay attention to the project, and everyone has been talking about multimedia for a while now. So I thought that the technology itself would be pretty fundable, and especially working with needy kids, inner city kids that need additional help. I guess I actually thought that the project would be pretty easily fundable. When we started the searches, we looked for, by the keyword search, I guess, which you can describe a little better since you're more familiar with it, but we looked for anything that had to do with adjudicated youth, had to do with telecommunications, with technology, and came up with a list of foundations and different organizations that had funded those types of projects in the past.
There were a lot of them too, weren't there?
Yeah, actually we did come across quite a few.
One of the things, Barry, we did is in putting this whole idea together was, Kathryn points out that we did look for adjudicated youth as one possibility, and then we got into the projects and we looked to see if there were other descriptors within each of those projects that would also uncover projects that we felt were similar to this. The advantage of this project, in my judgment, is there was nothing like it, and so this would set a brand new ideal typic project that could be used and disseminated all over the place. I didn't see anything. Did you see anything that was even close to this?
And obviously the problem really would be funding. I mean, this group, ASK, is a very small group, and they do get some funding from the DC Judicial Court, and they get some funding from Georgetown, but you know, they don't have the funding to put the computers into place. And for it to really work, we would need the youth to have access to the computers and have it be in their own neighborhoods so that they could go to their community center or the church where they have their weekly meetings and get access to the computer. So I feel that it is a unique project, and I feel that the funding is one of the most important aspects, because without the funds it really can't work. And I don't want to see one computer sitting in an office over at Georgetown that one technology expert uses. I think it's most important for the kids to get access to it. And for the transparency, the technology essentially to become transparent. I don't want it to be put up on a pedestal, like this is the one computer we have and everyone has to be very careful with it. I think it should be that they can use it and be comfortable
their
with
hands
it.
on it,
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so that's why the funding is so important.
Well, it seems like they would learn more also if they were
Oh.
actually using the technology rather than having someone hand it to them.
Exactly, and the exchange, that they're doing all this writing and they're taking photographs and they're trying to get a sense of themselves, and to do it themselves will help their self-esteem, and then to have an audience across the nation, I think will be very important for them.
Do you feel that this is the kind of thing that you could serve a wide audience for, Kathryn?
I think so. I think, I get very excited about the technology, and I think that you have to be careful that, some of my ideas aren't too idealistic. I don't know that it would work with every group. I mean, you need support. You need someone that, as we all know, that can support the computers, because computers can be kind of sketchy, and you would need someone that could actually work with the site coordinators, because it's important for it to be a tool that the site coordinators, the people that are already working with the youth, it's important for them to have it as a tool. And so I think it has potential for lots of different environments, but I also realize that it probably wouldn't be appropriate for every group.
But I think the importance of your project is that you are basically empowering the people, your
Right.
target audience, whether they
Right.
be students or even adults, so that they gain a skill and able to coordinate all that skill to produce something that they're very proud of.
Right, and I feel that it's very important that technology be put in the hands of a diverse group. I don't like the idea that it's going to become the differentiation between the have and the have-nots, and I think that it's important for those of us with access to resources like the searches that we've done through Dialogue to put some effort into that and to make sure that everyone is getting access to this great technology.
I like the idea of contacting all those people who have done similar projects, and to bring them into this whole new development and this whole possibility, to develop a whole new network that would basically support your project. I think that's one way to do it. And also, although Kathryn and I, Barry, basically worked on public funding and some private funding, I really think that there are a lot of computer organizations out there that would be very interested in really addressing these kinds of issues. And so one of the things that when the course is done here is Kathryn and I are planning then to continue the research and do it that way. And I'm also mentioned that Jerry Varner, let's send a message to Jerry with a complete description of what we need to do, and let's see if Jerry can locate some federal resources for us. I mean, he basically said he would do that, right? So as soon as it opens 2 weeks from now, the first day and the first hour, Kathryn and I will be sitting at the computer and ready to get into the system and ask him questions.
Right.
So I think that's a possibility. What are some of the other next steps, Kathryn, that you'd like to take?
Well, I think that your suggestion is good, maybe to identify some projects that are already occurring that are incorporating some of the technology and trying to incorporate them into my project. First on my list really is to contact some of the foundations. I've made a few calls, and I'm not as familiar with the grant writing process, and so I need to get a little bit more up to speed on that. I have some resources that I'm going to review on how to actually put my proposal into the form that they would accept. But mainly I need to make some contacts and to learn from them what they need me to do as far as the proposal. I guess because they all have different stipulations, different forms they want you to fill out, or different, so I need to actually make those contacts and narrow down, because we did come up with actually quite a few foundations.
Yeah, more than we could possibly write to.
Yes.
Well, the key here, I think, Barry and Kathryn, is that this is a great idea. The idea of letting students have hands-on is key to this thing. We can't have haves and have-nots anymore in our society. There's not room for it. And working with this whole segment of the population to prevent recidivism, for the returning to the incarceration, is just not the way to do business. So this ought to really work. Thank you very, very much, Kathryn.
Thank you for having me.
One of the most important things today, as we look at our world, is the business of taking care of our environment. The way to get at it, of course, is to start as young as possible and to work with children to have them make a difference in what's going to happen to the future of our world. As Bob said in an earlier conversation that we've had, if you start at that level, you can make almost anything happen when they get to be older. So we're really fortunate today to have Bob Wood with us from Florida. Bob's one of the students in the course, and he's done some amazing things in adapting this whole new area of multimedia technology to really helping youth do a better job in really looking what our new environment needs to be, and probably they're going to do a better job than anybody else. Bob is the executive director of something that's called Renaissance of Discovery. Is that right, Bob?
Yep.
And it's in Winter Park?
Winter Park, Florida, outside of Orlando.
Okay. Bob, we'd like you to tell us a little bit about the project, what it's about, and you have a clip, I believe, that shows a little bit about the kinds of things that you're doing. So what is your project?
Well, basically, when I began looking at this whole business of the environmental movement, I realized that you couldn't just take the environment as an individualized unit, and this is the environment, and it has to do with the natural world only. Environments have got to relate to much broader areas. There's environments that happen right here in the studio. There's environments that happen in our own lives, and there is ultimately the natural environment. And I began to realize that as society has progressed, the environmental movement has become a part of the educational process. Little children today know more about what it means to be a part of the environment than you or I do, because it just wasn't an issue. I began to realize that that was the key building block to a much bigger educational philosophy. And so I've dedicated a good portion of my research and study to take that building block, take that philosophy, and develop an educational methodology around it. I have the first clip, which will really set up the conversation nice. It really shows the mission statement for the project and where it's going, and then we can take the conversation from there. If we could go ahead and see that.
We live in an age of tremendous opportunity, a time when the strength of our nation is being rediscovered in the hearts of her people, and old systems of education, business, and politics are being challenged and renewed. The Cold War has ended, and a new order is now emerging. Global interdependence, environmental awareness, and new technologies are fast becoming the way of life for countries who have already begun preparing for the economy of the 21st century. The leaders in this new order will be those who can better educate themselves and their children to be technologically advanced, motivated to engage problems with creativity and resourcefulness, and insightful enough to respect the fragile diversity of all creation in the process. We live in an age of tremendous opportunity. This opportunity starts today with innovative education. Innovative education begins with a renaissance of discovery.
The name Renaissance of Discovery actually comes out of a time we began looking at, well, what is multimedia and how do we use this application of multimedia to educate people in a new way? And I began realizing that multimedia is a term that's really been stolen by the computer industry. Multimedia is something that goes way back in history. And one of the greatest times of multimedia and communication was the Renaissance. But then they didn't use computers and video. It was marble and stone and buildings. Ultimately, the technology that we have today is a tool to communicate. And so if we're going to learn to communicate about the environment, the key component there is how do we communicate with one another? The three main elements that were set up in that clip were that, one, we need to be technologically advanced if we're going to retain the leadership role in the world as the most progressive and creative nation ever to have existed. Number two, we need to make sure that we educate our young people to be creative problem solvers at all levels. And ultimately that deals with communications and how to be creative and how does creativity, where does it come from and how does it work? And ultimately it all has got to come back to the environment. So that's, the idea really started out of the environmental movement, but it's grown much, much broader and much bigger. That is actually the seed core philosophy of a much bigger program and approach to education.
So you're combining the use of technology and environment and just lifestyles and diversity in your program.
Yeah, exactly. It's really taking three very simple elements: environmental awareness, creative problem solving, and high technology, and putting them together to begin an educational philosophy that borrows on the traditional education. You begin tapping in history, math, science, other forms of traditional education, but using a new philosophy. The objective of this project is really to challenge the way we educate children, the way we learn. And so we've got to begin looking at new ways of coming to utilizing information. We can no longer just have information for information's sake or knowledge, but what are we going to do with this information? And how are we going to be creative with that information? And how is the information going to be used in a responsibly creative way that will not impact the environment in a negative way? So that's where the environmental component comes into it.
You've had a lot of success so far in working with youth, haven't you, Bob?
I think that's the beauty of it. I was talking to Barry earlier, and I was saying how much fun it is to do this project, because it's a passion, and those long nights where you're working on this stuff, and then you get with these kids, or you get with adults. We even do this with businesses. I've done it with bank executives and across the board. And it's fun. It's a good time, because it's education from a different perspective. And so I began using bits and pieces of this over the past 10 years in different projects that I've been involved in. I came to your program in this class when I realized I wanted to tap into the technology side, not only to utilize it in my presentations, but to begin to use it in the program as one of the basis that the technology actually becomes the centrifuge. It becomes integrated into all the other curricula. In order to do that, I realized I had to go to a source of good information, and voila. There's no one else doing this stuff, let me tell you.
Well, is this the kind of thing that could be put in any school district in the United States?
Ultimately, yes. I think as we designed it, we realized that most teachers are so busy with the work that they have to do, and we didn't want to design another program that they had to go through these hoops. There's more hoops. Oh, great. Now we have another criteria we have to meet. Instead of educating our children, now we have to worry about being their parents and being their therapists and being all these other things. So we decided to actually design it so that it works with the teacher, and the teacher can use it as the basis to launch their curricula from. The problem with traditional education, though, is that it's done in what's called the industrial base way of educating. The bell rings, you have an hour's class. The bell rings, you go to the next hour. You go to the next hour. We don't learn that way.
It always used to work for me, though, Barry.
That's part of our problem, man. That's part of our problem.
So actually, yeah, it could work in the public schools, but really, I think where we're going with this is actually creating a new way of educating, which is based on a holistic model of education, which integrates these things.
But basically, you're using it as your bottom layer here, the use of technology to make it easier for people to learn, like using video clips of the rainforest and using sight and sound and touch and feel from the technology perspective to allow people to learn better or more diverse.
I don't think we could have had a better segue to this next video, Barry, and you,
and I haven't even.
And you haven't even seen it yet. If we could roll that next clip, that really illustrates how technology can lead us back to the environment and the earth.
During a space flight, the psyche of each astronaut is reshaped. Having seen the sun, the stars, and our planet, you become more full of life, softer. You begin to look at all living things with greater trepidation, and you begin to be more kind and patient with the people around you. I have been in love with the sky since birth, and when I could fly, I wanted to go higher, to enter space and become a man of the heights. During the 8 days that I spent in space, I realized that mankind needs height, primarily to better know our long-suffering Earth, to see what cannot be seen close up, not just to love her beauty, but also to ensure that we do nothing to bring even the slightest harm to the natural world. From space, I see myself as one more person among the millions and millions who lived, and will live on Earth. Inevitably, this makes one thing clear about our existence and the way in which we live. We must learn to enjoy, to share our short lives as fully as possible. It seems to me that even the wisest philosophers of the Renaissance, or the most daring minds from the past, could not estimate the real size of our planet. Earlier, it seemed immeasurably great, almost infinite. Only after the middle of this century did we, having gone up and above the Earth into space, see with surprise and disbelief just how small the Earth really is. Some saw it as an island in a limitless ocean of creation. Some compared it to a spaceship with a crew numbering more than 6 billion. The white, twisted clouds and endless shapes of blue in the ocean make the hum of the spacecraft systems, the radio chatter, and even your own breathing disappear. There is no wind or cold or smell to tell you that you're connected to the Earth. You have an almost dispassionate platform, remote, Olympian, and yet so moving that you can hardly believe how emotionally attached you are to those rough patterns shifting steadily below. All of these quotes come from astronauts from around the world who once looked out from a high onto our Earth, and through technology were able to see the beauty and the power of the creation we call Earth. The amazing thing living in Florida is that I get to watch the space shuttle on a regular basis. And even to this day, we get so excited when you hear the sonic booms, you know what it is. It's coming in, and you run to the TV and turn it on. Or you know when it's going to lift off. And it seems like the city comes to a stop, those people who are aware of it, and they stop and they watch it. And you see people in the streets cheering. It's such an unusual thing. And for me, the power of that is that these people who are absolutely the most technologically advanced humans, they're surrounded by technology. When they go up to space, what do they say? They don't say, oh, great diodes. Oh, the meters are great. Really, the wisdom that comes out of it is that they see ourselves, they see the beauty. And I think for the first time, we can begin drawing from that wisdom and realizing that all our education has got to take place on this environment we call the Earth. And the Earth is just made up of biodiversity, of creatures and humans, and we've got to learn how to relate to these things. Not in some cosmic tree-hugging way, but in a very real 1990s, year 2000 way. We've got to begin identifying how are we going to recreate the paradigm. If we are changing in society, as we can tell that we are, where are we going, and how are we going to identify where we're going to create a better world?
It all comes down to creativity, doesn't it? and what he's trying to do is develop creative problem solving and make it part of how children view the world and this whole environment.
Well, I think what he's trying to do is to integrate technology into the way we view the world and make us each responsible for the way we view the world and the way we treat the world, which is critical in everything that we do. You know, we talk kiddingly about all the reams of paper that we generate on the computer every day of our lives.
We do.
But we really don't discuss the impact of doing that, of killing all the trees and all that kind of good stuff, which would be, and they've coming out now with green PCs. Which makes us more responsible.
I'm glad they changed the color.
No, not that kind of green PCs. But I agree, it is making us a little bit more, it should be making us more creative. It should be making us more diverse in our thinking and how we relate to our environment.
I like the idea of developing a way of thinking in the part of children that makes them and get responsible for this whole integration process. You know the thing I think we do that's wrong? We wait till somebody becomes an adult before we really try to encourage these things. And by that time, people can look at it logically, and it doesn't become part of what they are as people.
Or they tell them what they're supposed to think instead of letting them discover how to think or all the different options.
You used a term earlier, empowerment. And, you know, the big key word now is empowerment, problem solving, and technology. Well, all we've tried to do is take what the buzzwords are and put them into a practical curricula. What really drives me crazy is when I was doing this research, you read about this wonderful emerging age of creation. We're moving from the information society into this age of creativity. And businesses like AT&T and Chrysler Motor Corporation is utilizing creativity to come up with new products, and they're doing it very successfully. The issue comes, though, well, how do we get there? And in all my research, I couldn't find a real practical methodology, and so I decided, well, how do we get there? So I decided to contribute as a map maker on one way, one idea on how we can get to this place that business and sociologists and educators are telling us we're going. I would like to help with this project develop a way to get there. And so once you have the environmental awareness key foundation, the next thing you build in is the creativity. Even before you get to the technology, even before you sit in front of the computer, first you have to have that sense, that mystery of life, that sense of allness of the earth. Next you have to move into creativity, because ultimately all this technology is lovely, but it's the old saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Well, and it's a tool. It's nothing else. That's all it is a tool to help you achieve those other objectives.
And I think because you guys are in that business, you understand that better, but a lot of people see it as a panacea, as the technology, and multimedia is like the latest buzzword. Well, what is multimedia but just an integration of some different components that have been placed together? A very important application, but only useful insofar as that it's creative. And so now we move to the next part of this philosophy and methodology. How do you begin developing creative thinkers and creative problem solvers? And I'd like to roll another clip that I brought. It's very short, and I'd like to kind of do a segue into it to explain that this is actually one of the methods we use to educate. It's very much an MTV-style, upbeat, fun environment when Renaissance of Discovery is happening in a retreat environment, and we can talk about that a little more later. All of the education is done interactive, and it's done to empower the students. I believe that they are not the future, they are the now. And they need to believe that they are contributors now. Now, not in the future, now, today, in their homes, in their schools, in their churches, in their communities. They have the ability to contribute right there. Well, what does creativity mean? So I asked them to sit down and watch this next clip, and it's going to come at you fast, and you have to be ready to explain what you saw. And then we group them into groups, and we do all these activities. But it's based on this next thing you're about to see. You got to watch it quick, because it's going to come at you fast. What did you see? What were the words?
Still a state of shock. Everything's connected, isn't it? Doesn't matter if it's technology
will
or...
affect tomorrow.
Will affect life tomorrow.
Will affect life tomorrow.
Ultimately, and that is the foundation, I believe, of creativity. Because you can be as creative as you want, but if you're in a business situation, that creativity must be supported by systems that are economically viable and lead to an end product that is profitable and also is environmentally friendly. And so you start seeing how working with children at this level later is to the advantage of corporations. It's the advantage of business because we're trying to train people to be creative problem solvers and integrating these ideas of everything is connected. But most of us don't think in systems. And so the next phase of Renaissance of Discovery is developing creativity. And we go through a whole series of activities. This is a very brief example of the areas that we get into. And we try to develop the children themselves or the participants themselves discover from within themselves where their level of self-actualization is and what are their talents and abilities and what are their unique gifts and how then Do they learn to communicate those with others so that they can get to an end objective? Totally before we even get to the technology. Before you even power up the PC, you have to make sure that you've got people who are connected back to a global vision, are able to feel good about themselves and have creativity and able to work with others. And now you can begin to power up this PC and look at, well, what tools are we going to use?
You know, this is one of the most powerful arguments you can have for not buying hardware first.
Well, you know, when he's talking here, it's reminding me of when we were talking with Computer Sciences Corporation, and they were telling us that the office worker of the future is going to be the creative problem solver and the analyst of the year 2000.
They're going to hire Bob's children.
That's right, exactly. And they're going to do exactly what Bob's talking about. They're not going to be in there, you know, typing or pushing buttons. They're going to be solving problems.
See, and this is the thing, you know, I didn't make any of this stuff up. I just read it. It's research. It's documented. It's published out there. And I realize, again, when I'm doing my research, I'm like, okay, how are we going to get there? How are we going to get there? How are we going to get there?
Oh, but
I didn't see that.
Bob
so.
is a systems integrator.
That's right, a world integrator.
A world integrator. And they should be destroyed.
I'm out of here.
Pretty good, Bob. Really excellent. Good concept. Children love this, don't they?
Oh, we have so much fun. I become a big child myself when I'm involved in this because it's just so much fun to do. And I think what I really get off on is watching the children discover who they are. We keep saying children, but I must say I've done this with
Youth.
adults in business. I have done this for a bank in Florida where their little local branch needed to become more progressive and empower the employees. They ended up going from one of the lowest sales generating, money generating banks to one of the highest in the Sarasota County area. And they bring it back to the Renaissance of Discovery. It's not only for children. I like to approach the child side to it because they're more open. By the time you get to adults, it takes you the first couple hours of the retreat to get these folks just debriefed and deprogrammed from the way things are. This is how I learned. If you've ever seen the commercial Stay Between the Lines, any of our viewers who know that commercial, I love it.
Well, I only have really one question for you. Do you think you can help Reynolds?
It could take some time. I'm thinking about moving to D.C. now.
You know what's nice? It's nice to know that inside of each person there's that sense of creativity. And if you can tap it, whether they're kindergarten children or whether they're 60 or 65-year-old retirees, there's something in each person. And if you can bring it out, if you can talk about the interconnectivity, what life is about, that's the key. You also said something else that Barry and I have been preaching since day one of this course, and that is technology is great, but it has to be preceded by a very careful analysis of what it is you need to do. Barry and I have beat on everybody about the concept. You plan first, then you worry about technology.
Because the technology, everyone puts the cart before the horse, and then you're stuck with all this stuff that you don't know what to do with, or you're underutilizing, or you really. The technology side's fantastic. I consider myself a techno junkie. I'm surrounded by this stuff. I love it. But I really believe, as you say, before you can put a child in front of it and expect them to be a great creative person, you got to do this process first. And then you can't just put them in a computer lab and give them 1 hour a day, turn on the computers to hack a little bit, and then turn it off again. The computer itself, integrated into this philosophy of education, changes the whole way we educate, which is ultimately the goal of the project down the road, is to actually design learning centers, accredited learning centers, which use this philosophy as the foundation to educate the traditional curricula.
Bob, once you create a creative process in children or youth or whatever it is, once you establish that spark of creativity, do they keep it forever?
I think that's the toughest thing. That's a very good question, because they can keep it if it is maintained. If there is external stimuli outside of from within their environment, relational environment, to stimulate that. A lot of times through traditional education, we don't do that. We don't stimulate the creativity because it's inconvenient. It's difficult. What do you do with a creative child? What do you do with the child that is pushing the edge all the time? A lot of times they end up being called the EH kids, or the
problem child.
The problem
child.
That was me.
That was me. That was totally me. I hated traditional education. Now, a lot of educators don't like what I say because it's threatening to what they preach. But I believe that this type of methodology, once integrated into the teaching of teachers, begins to change the whole way teachers will teach. When I work with students in the local Central Florida area, education students who are a part of another project that I run for a local college down there, they just love this. They're just hammering to get involved in it, to be able to begin learning this way. To answer your question, does it stay with you? I think if you're willing to continue being connected to the environment, continue stimulating your creativity, and continue plugging away at the technology, because the technology, as we heard earlier from Kathryn, it does stimulate that creativity. If you're in front of it, if you're touching it, you've got to fuel the fire. So somewhere, we have got to be able to continue giving this stimulation to the student. Sitting in front of a TV or sitting there with a computer game is not necessarily a creative endeavor. It's an end result of someone else's creativity.
Well, when these kids grow up, or these adults go back to their work environment, it's going to be. I think it's going to be that sustains them. It's that creativity. It's that idea that they have gotten something and have developed something on their own.
And they take ownership.
Yeah.
And if you go to work and you don't have ownership of your work, you're just another drone. And after a while, you burn out. And if you're burnt out, you're not affecting the company in a positive way. Everyone talks team. Well, how do you create a team? You've got to have a group of individuals who are working together, who are self-motivated, and who feel self-worth from what they're doing. And from there, you can create environments that are productive, that can create products that make people feel good about themselves. So we're really changing the whole way we even look at industry with this.
One of the
step
things,
by step.
if I had to put it all together, I would have to say Bob has, we call him a systems integrator, as I said, but it's really more than that. It's a person who has created an opportunity for just everyone to really look at themselves and to look at the environment and to put it together in a way that, the only way perhaps, that makes sense for what technology is doing to this world. And he's put all these pieces together. What a great thing. And Bob, we really wish you an incredible amount of success in this.
Thanks for having me.
It's such an important.
Welcome back. We have today with us Kathryn Valdez. Kathryn is a independent educational technology consultant, very concerned with the whole instructional process. And what I've asked Kathryn to do is to take Microsoft Project, which is a piece of software that's a very important tool in project development, and to look at that tool in light of what one has to do to get ready to plan for a project. Now, Kathryn's going to sort of tell you why this is the case, but when you have a very small project and you have enough time frame to get ready for the project, well, you sort of do it as you go along. But the larger the project, the more careful and deliberate the preparation has to be. And it's not something you can do in your head. It has to be very systematic. And all the activities, all the data collection, has to be tied to one another in order to make the project really competitive. Now, Caputo, when she was talking, talked a little bit about the kind of tools we used to develop the front end for that. That is the research piece. Very, very effective. But just how do we get ready to prepare for a large project?
Mm-hmm. Well, and you made a couple good points. I was listening to your interview with Ann, and one of the things that you said is once the RFP is released, there is just not enough time. And that's true. I mean, when you're dealing with a large project, and in this case, I'm dealing with a project that is probably going to total over $5 million per year. It's going to involve multiple sites all over the world, people who are going to be involved in technology and in instruction and in management. So there's a lot of coordination that's going to go into this project. The RFP hasn't even been released, will not be released until a couple months from now. But I've been working on preparing for that for over 6 months. So there's just a lot of preparation that is going into that. And I have been using Microsoft Project as well as Excel and Word. But one of the points I would like to make is that they're just tools. And before we even get to the point of using the tool, we have to know what in the heck we're going to want to do with the tool. I mean, it's like I can't take home a screwdriver unless I know what kind of screw I'm going to need to use it on. And so I'd like to talk a little bit today about the whole process that's leading me to actually writing the proposal, because I haven't even begun to write the proposal, but I've already been working for 6 months. One of the first points that I would like to make is that it is absolutely essential to establish a vision, a goal, a mission, whatever you want to call it, for your project before you start. I've worked with community colleges, I've worked with prisons, I've worked with high schools, I've worked with the military, I've worked with hundreds of sites that use instructional technology. And if I had to point to the most important factor that influences success or failure, I would say it would be the failure of communicating a vision, of knowing what in the heck you're trying to do with this technology. And I don't mean by vision, my vision is to win the RFP. I mean, that's only the beginning. I mean by vision, where am I going with this project? This is very important for three reasons. One of them that, first place, as you put together a project like I'm putting together, where I'm going to be dealing, and I'm already dealing, with hardware vendors, software vendors, technology people, institutional leaders. There are so many decision makers involved that I might not even have a time to sit down and present to them a 30-page overview of what I'm doing. So I need to be able to succinctly say, this is where I'm going. This is what we want to do. Another thing that I think is really important is that we tend to forget that once a project is implemented, quite often the people who write the proposal aren't the actual implementers. I mean, you could be in a school district thinking of this wonderful project for teaching bilingual children how to read. And you could get the grant, get the technology, but the actual implementers are going to be teachers in the classroom. You have to be sure that they know why you started off along this road in the first place.
So what a common vision does is it ties together all of the groups, those who are going to evaluate it,
right,
those who put the RFP together,
right,
and those who have to implement it.
Exactly.
And what's missing, as you're pointing out in a lot of projects, is there is no sense of that kind of common or shared vision.
Right. Well, a big problem I found, I used to visit sites that I used to call them orphan sites or stepchildren sites. What would happen would be that the person who originally wrote the grant got promoted. I mean, the grant was so wonderful, and he got rewarded and moved away, so that the people in the classroom or in the computer lab or in the learning center had a whole bunch of technology but didn't know why it was there in the first place, because that had never been communicated at every level to all the users. So it's really important. And the other thing, and I'll make this point because it is so critical before you start, is evaluation. Now you might think, gee, you haven't even written the proposal, you're already thinking about evaluation. But that's a real critical factor. When you're working on government proposals or any kind of proposals, somewhere down the line somebody's going to say, is it working? Should we refund it? Was it successful? And if you don't embed evaluation from the very beginning, and that means, what is it that I'm trying to do? From the very beginning, what's my goal? What is it that I'm trying to do so that 6 months from now, when I'm actually setting very precise evaluation guidelines in place, I can refer back to, well, this is where I'm trying to get to. Okay, so that's sort of, to me, it's just so critical that it has to be emphasized before you sit down to start getting into the real nitty-gritty.
go into some of the other points as quickly as you can that really you have to consider as part of this whole process.
Okay. Well, let me talk a little bit and really about the 4 steps that I've taken right now with preparing for my proposal. And they're really 4 steps. One of the first things I had to do is do a project description.
Okay.
Because again, I'm going to people, I may have communicated with the director of a division and said, hey, I've got this great idea, this is what I want to do. The first thing she's going to say, and she said, is, I want to go to my staff with it, this is good, can you give me a brief overview? Because I need something warm and fuzzy, I need a 1-pager that says this is where I'm going. So that's the first, that's really critical, and I found that project description then I'll use with all of the other people that I'm doing the preliminary coordination with, as far, hardware vendors or whatever. This is a project description. Secondly, what are my goals? What is it that I want? Where is it that I'm going? Thirdly, I have made a preliminary plan, which is, and I'll go into that in more detail as to how I'm going to plan for the proposal. And last but not least, and this is really where the tools come in, is actually sitting down and enumerating the pre-proposal tasks that we've done. When I developed the project overview, if you will, I've included a background. What is it that I'm doing? A real description for that person who may have no idea what it is that we're doing. Also talked a little bit about the context. When you're dealing, for example, with hardware vendors who may not be familiar with an educational context, you have to explain, well, this is a prison, but guess what? Education goes on in prison. Or this is the military. So you have to give an idea of what your context is. Other is a general idea of what the needs are going to be, and what the anticipated requirements are going to be on the RFP. You might say, and a lot of people might say, well, gee, the RFP hasn't been released. An RFP hasn't been released, so how do you know? But it's a lot of the information is available, it's public information. We know if I'm going to go and get a Title VII grant, or if I'm going to get a Chapter 1 grant.
Sure.
You were just looking up in dialogue under foundations. What are the specific qualities that certain foundations look for? So that's the sort of thing that you need to narrow down to, again, it's just narrowing down the path. Comparing to what Ann talked about, cultivating that pearl there. I mean, it's the same thing here, but I'm going from a broad vision, narrowing it down, whereas she was going from more specific to broader. After I developed that preliminary sort of overview of the project, then I've used that with people that I've been talking to and will be involved in the project, and then I've said, okay, what are our goals? And I use the word goals. It could really be, what's our project going to look like when it's finished? The RFP is going to come out. What is it going to look like? What's the administrative structure going to be? Who is going to do what? How are the major players involved going to interact? What are the operations? What are the functions? What are all of these people going to do? What is my program going to do? What's the technology going to do? And all of this is very general. I'm not talking about a detailed, I'm talking about a couple pages at the most.
Sketch it out.
Sketch it, yeah, exactly. Because again, we haven't gotten to the point where we've made a decision, but everybody needs to know what's going on.
Is this one of your 4 points, or is this a different point?
Yeah, well, this is just, we're talking about where it is that I'm going, establishing my goal. And once I've done that, and I've talked about cost, and I've talked about quality, and how we're going to evaluate the project once it's done, then I'm really ready to sit down and do a plan. So what I've done is I've done a general vision. This is where I'm going. This is where I want to go. This is what the situation is now. This is what my proposal is going to do. Hopefully, this is what my project is going to look like. And if we all agree on this, we all agree it's going to be, $5 million project, it's going to involve technology, it's going to be all over the world. If we all agree, then we're ready to sit down and actually plan to write the proposal. Not to write the proposal, just simply to plan. Writing the
and
plan.
The larger the proposal.
And the larger the proposal.
The greater degree of preparation, the more documentation you have to have, the more
exactly.
careful the thinking
Yeah.
has to go into it. And you could be preparing just to get for the RFP for 3 or 4 months, couldn't you?
Oh yeah, I mean this that I'm talking about, I mean I've had my project description done for 6 months and I've honed it and I've changed it. I mean, which is one of the wonderful things about word processing. I mean, as you go along, you're cutting and pasting and changing, and but that's taken quite a long time. The preliminary plan now for the proposal, which is what we're doing, what the sort of the phase I'm in right now, is actually preparing, first of all, an outline.
Right.
An outline of what the proposal is going to be, and that's real important. And again, even though the RFP hasn't been released, I know that there are certain things that all proposals are going to have. They're all going to include certain things. Another important factor, once I look at, okay, these are my 10 chapters, these are my 10 chapters in my proposal, I need to determine what my research needs are. What is it that I'm going to have to research? And by that I mean not only the theoretical research that you were talking about, using something like dialogue into bilingual education or other reading programs that might have been successful, military education, Chapter 1, whatever. But I'm also talking about the research needs for the practical aspect of it. Budgets, travel costs, hardware costs, logistics, all of that.
And all
sort
of these
thing.
factors must be taken into consideration prior to the time you get an RFP, because if you only have a month, then there's no way you can possibly collect this information, put it together, assemble it, do your budgets, and do the other pieces.
There's no way. I mean, if I'm talking about implementing a project in over 50 sites all over the world, just researching the travel costs, just researching the local, how much is lodging going to cost, how much is it going to cost to rent space, how much is it going to cost to buy furniture, or should I ship it, or should I buy it there? I mean, that's taking a whole month. So it's just really necessary to be able to do that beforehand. Another thing that's been really important for me to enumerate are competencies. You know, who am I going to need on this project? Obviously, and we all have our pet projects, and we all think that, we know, and I mean, I certainly feel very close to this project, but I know that I need other people, other sets of knowledge to help me on this.
So you have to pull those all together, and you must also plan for how they're going to be connected to this particular project.
Exactly. And last, of course, but not least, I need a budget. I need to know what kind of material resources I'm going to need to prepare the proposal. I'm not talking about the actual budget for the proposal. I'm talking about, I'm going to need long distance calls, I'm going to need a fax, I'm going to need, and I am using already software tools such as Microsoft Project or Word computers. So how much is it going to cost to prepare this budget?
Well, I see that you have a chart here that you've laid
Yes.
out, and this is, I'm assuming, a printout of Microsoft Project?
Right, exactly. Now, what this is really the next step after we've done this. So we've got our preliminary plan, and now we're ready to sit down and actually task this out. Okay.
Put all these things together that you've done in your initial research.
Right, exactly. Because once you've done your plan, and and I'm saying here we're talking multiple people, we're talking multiple vendors and subcontractors. You need to be able to then specify objective by objective or task by task what's going to be done, who's going to do it, how long is it going to take, are there tasks that can be done simultaneously, because if we have 10 people working together, it's obviously there should be some overlap. And I guess people used to probably do this with a big spreadsheet and color-coded thumbtacks or something.
No, they did. I mean, that's the way it was done.
Yeah, that's exactly. But now we have Microsoft Project. So what I have done is taken the pre-proposal tasks. I've worked with some of the major players in this who are working on the proposal, gotten the tools together and sat down and said, what is it that we need to do? Now, the tasks, and you can see them on the slide, and we made a slide because obviously it's really going to be impossible to look at the details
it's very small.
of the spreadsheet. Right. But basically, the tasks that you're seeing on the slide are the tasks that are enumerated right here. In more detail, right here. For example, one of the tasks is carry out research. Well, here I've really broken it down into the theoretical research, into instructional background, into things like budget kinds of research, travel research, hardware research. So we've broken it down into the separate tasks. What Microsoft Project has really allowed me to do is to lay out a plan of attack. How long is it going to take me to do each tasks, and what's the timing for each task, and are there tasks, and visually then I can look at the timeline that Microsoft Project produces and see, visually as I look at the timeline, how long it's going to take, and are there tasks that could overlap? Could you be doing something while I'm doing
Right.
it?
Well, I really appreciate this, Kathryn. I'm just going to just take a minute and try to pull this all together if I can. It seems to me that we've looked at the information needs. We've looked at the kind of tools that are absolutely essential. We've looked at the kind of things that people do to really pull these projects together. But quite frankly, all the tools in the world don't make up for the logical and creative thinking that goes into it. And maybe that's the final point.
Right. Exactly.
Well, I really appreciate that. And thank you very much for sharing how one gets ready to prepare for a project.
Thank you.